How's it going, everybody? So we just watched the presentation by Eric Nelson, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. So, how are you doing, Eric? How are you feeling this conference?
Good, thanks. First time to participate, and it's pretty thrilling. I do know some people from the conference, but I never have attended the conference. So this is my first time to be here, both as a participant and as a presenter. And it's far beyond what I expected, far beyond what I expected. Even when you go to academic conferences, you don't get this much stuff. This is truly extraordinary, and I'm grateful to have found out about it and to be here.
Awesome. So, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started with a question because I think everybody liked your video and they're eager to get something going on. So, I'm going to start off one with Deborah Powney. Great presentation. As a researcher in the field, I fully appreciate your stance on questioning the empirical knowledge of a DB expert. However, I find that feminist methodology rejects the scientific method, particularly empirical quantitative methods, on the grounds of that it was created by the patriarchy. How would this be viewed in court?
Now, first thing is that wouldn't stand in court. So I don't even think that would be raised. If an attorney raised that, you should fire them and get another one, even if you're on the other side. So having said that, though, you're right. There are certain ways to try to dismiss empirical research, one of them being, oh, it's the source of the patriarchy. Well, okay, so let's be clear. That's a stereotype, and I thought stereotypes were bad. So we want to tell people, if you're thinking in terms of stereotypes, you should probably stop doing that and learn how to judge people based on the content of their character or the content of their professional work, and not on a stereotype that's used as an excuse not to listen to them. I hope my response isn't too pointed, but then again, we need to be pointed. That's part of the problem. My head is still spinning from Janet Fiamingo's presentation, where it just really caused me to start asking myself, how much of what is in my head is female thinking and how much is male thinking, and also how much of that that's been programmed into me is actually feminist thinking. And one of the things has been, we're not allowed to actually speak strongly. Why? Says who? So there you go. There's a strong response. Now, having said that, I think the point I made in the video, I encourage you to go back and watch the video. It's also made in both of those books that I cited, is this. You can't use the methods that are used by feminist researchers. You can't use feminist research methods when you're studying safety. No government agency, not only the United States, but other countries, Australia, England, India, Japan, even Middle Eastern countries, dictatorship countries, democracy, nobody uses that. If you've got to study anything that has to do with safety, you can only use empiricism. It is the highest form of research. This whole idea of, I hear it all the time, I am an academic, I just don't talk about my affiliation. I hear it all the time. Oh, we have to respect the qualitative as much as the quantitative. No, we don't, because you can't use quantitative to assess whether or not a medicine is safe for kids. You can't use it to find out whether or not brake pads on a car will actually stop the car. There's huge limitations to this qualitative, subjective opinion. Well, consensus, we get 30 people in a room and we ask their opinion. That's not a quantitative finding. So I would be courageous in saying those type of things. All right. By the way, can I say my quick thank yous?
Oh yeah, you can go ahead.
I want to say thank you to Vernon, first of all. Wow, by this far in the week, you have hosted a lot of these. I'm sure you're tired, so thank you. I want to say thank you to the organizers, which includes Vernon. Wow, really stellar what you've done. Thank you to the attendees, all of you. Thank you very much. To the men's rights activists, thank you also. And I would also say boys' rights activists. Let's make that distinction, men and boys. Thank you very much. Thank you to the presenters. As I told Vernon, I worked all week. I couldn't attend much, but I am so glad that I'm going to be able to go back and watch all these videos. That's going to be awesome. I also want to say a special shout out to Don Saxton. I think he might be in the room. Don and I have been talking for a long time. He knew me long before I got a PhD. And he's just want to say hi, Don, because I've appreciated all of our conversations through the years. Okay.
Yeah,
I want to clarify one thing. I want to clarify my position real quick, and we can go to the next question. I believe this. We need to strategically dismantle feminist judicial process, feminist judicial practice. Dismantle it. My contribution is to give legal strategies and to provide expert testimony. I can do that. And I do testify as an expert. Other things that are needed to dismantle feminist judicial practice is we need strategic litigation, strategic appeals. We need attorneys that are willing to do this, and we need people to fund it. So that's kind of where I'm at. Next question, please.
I want to say I appreciate your feedback, and I'm pretty sure all the attendees do too. And yes, Don Sexton appears to be there, and he does have some questions, I believe, but we'll get to them soon. So the next question is from Terrence White. Hi, Eric. Terrific presentation. How often is the cycle of violence and the power and control wheel actually trotted out in court?
The cases that I evaluated, every single one of them. I have not attended a lot of them. It is a study that I'm doing. I have been going and coding these hearings. When they appear, it comes out a lot. But of the 13 claims that I shared, not all 13 may show up in any one expert's testimony, but many of them will. And across several experts, you'll hear all of them repeatedly. As far as the power and control wheel, my sense of it is the old time experts might use it a little bit more. The less time in position expert might use it a little bit less, but that's subjective and I might be wrong. It definitely, I can tell you, because I talk about one of the quote top experts, Nancy Lemon. I devote an entire chapter to taking on Nancy Lemon's claims about domestic violence. It's in chapter 4, I believe, of my Depot book. The entire chapter is devoted to her. I've gone and watched her testify. I've got the transcripts from her testimony. She pulls that power and control wheel out real quick. So yes, it is used.
All right, now we got several questions by Don, so I'm going to go through them one by one. How many DVEs are there in California?
Don't know, it's a good question. My hunch is that there's 2 or 3 per county, more in a place like Los Angeles, less in a small county. But I don't think anybody's gotten that answer. By the way, I apologize, you can hear my Shih Tzu barking. I have big dogs that are well-trained and well-behaved, and I have a Shih Tzu who is out of control. So having said that, these are things that can be studied. It's a lack of people to do it, and it's a lack of funding. I'm actually involved in a very, very large study right now, and it's been very difficult to put it together because I'm preaching to the choir. There's so few people that actually want to get involved. Having said that, there is a group that approached me and asked me, we want to do a court watching study. How do we do it? Great, I've already got all the forms because I'm actually doing that study myself here. So if you want to find out, for example, how many DV experts are in your state, or if you want to do court watching, don't reinvent the wheel. Get hold of me. The email address, I'll give it right now, phd@fastmail.com. P is in Paul, H is in Henry, D is in David, PhD @fast, FASTMAIL.com.
Right.
Get hold of me and I'd be happy to help you find out how many are in your area.
Right, yeah. So you have some follow-up questions. So the second one is, both courts and empirical research strive for truth, and both can be corrupted. Clearly, feminists want corruption, but are a majority of Californians strongly against such corruption, and more practically, are a majority of non-feminist Californian women against such corruption?
That's a big question. And I'm looking at the Q&A and I don't, let's make sure I'm in the right one. I am not in the right one. I mean,
well, the Zoom ones, I basically have an eye on myself.
Yes, I want to take every part of that, but it was like a bunch of questions. Okay, there we go. I think it is. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I've got it. This was, is this the question by Dawn? Which?
Yes, I believe that's done. Yeah. So, and basically, I'll be the one
answering
questions. You don't have to actually read it. So
I'm not sure I agree that the courts strive for truth. The videos that I showed you might suggest that the courts don't always strive for truth, because after all, you heard training judges teaching judges not to think about due process, not to think about the evidence of a case. You heard training judges, you saw the video with your own eyes, first time they've ever been seen, ever. You were the first ones. You saw them saying, Well, you better think about the fact that if you don't grant that order, you're going to be reversed by the Court of Appeal. So I'm going to just say I'm not convinced that the courts strive for the truth, at least in the limited case of DVROs. Having said that, I think there is some truth that feminists have sought to corrupt the judicial process. I think they've actually been very successful at it. That's why I wrote a book about it. Majority of California is strongly against such corruption. I don't know because I haven't studied that data. Are a majority of non-feminist Californians against such corruption? I can partially answer that. I believe in chapter 21 of the Judicial War on Men, maybe it's chapter 20. I actually present long-term data on the number of individuals who identify as feminist, and it's gone way, way down. Having said that, I think it's fair to conclude from that and other studies that the presence of feminism in the population anywhere, not sure it's California though, has gone down, but that has not shaken loose the effect of feminism and influencing feminist judicial process. So,
right. So he has a third question. What can be influential to end corruption in court? Obviously, a large coalition, a majority of Californians, but is there a small, more influential group that can be enlisted?
Yeah, I'm of the opinion that strategic litigation and strategic appeals is the only way you're going to do it. You're not going to get it through the legislature, especially not in California. But strategic litigation and strategic appeals. So you have to find the attorneys. God rest his soul, Mark Angelucci is gone. We need other Mark Angeluccis and funders. And then that's how you do it.
All right, so Steve Moxon has a few questions.
Okay.
All right, so I'll start with the first one. Regarding proportion of false reports, rape being 45%, this fits with surveys of what police rape investigators estimate across the world, 50 to 90%, the London Metropolitan Police, 50 to 70%. A conservative estimate based on the two Home Office special reports on rape, looking at different categories of non-progression of cases, would be 30 to 34%. Your 45% figure is in line of all this, but on what basis do you see it as reliable?
Well, the figures that I cited, and they're in my book, so I'm just going to refer you to my book, but they were from well-done studies, several studies done at several universities and several police departments. I also have some other data that I've evaluated, which has been suppressed, and that's covered in my book also. But bottom line is, about 3/4 of the studies that might have findings that are pertinent, I don't include them. I really make everything I quote from be solid. So the best thing I can say is this. I don't want to drill down to the level of telling you which studies I looked at now. But if you want to email me, you're welcome to, and I can tell you which studies they were. Probably the quickest way I'll do that is I'll just send you a couple of pages out of my book where that's covered. I'm also interested, if you care to send me the Home Office stuff, I'd like to see that as well. So maybe we can do like an info exchange offline.
Right. So he has a second question, and you've included a lot of information, Steve. So feel free to share that in the chat. I'm pretty sure Eric would be happy to read through it, but I'm going to try and condense your question a bit here. How confident can you be that partner violence is not actually overwhelmingly female perpetrated, given the overall finding and review of the dyadic study of adolescents and young adults of much greater female perpetration, initiation, and escalation unilaterally and bilaterally? Males usually non-responsive or mildly reciprocating.
Yeah, I haven't seen that study, so I can't comment on it. I'd like to see it though, more the better, so please send it to me. I can just say that of all the studies I've looked at, and that would be thousands of them, there's maybe 70 that are well done. And there's one meta-analysis that was done by a professor out of Oregon where she weeded through just to the best of the studies. If you email me, I will send you a copy of the study. But bottom line is, anything that people claim to know about domestic violence, unless it's established on the well-done studies, is essentially at great risk of being in error. My opinion is that the best done study is Strauss 2008. That's where he looked at data in 32 different countries, had a lot of collaborators worldwide. the charts that you saw in the video, and they're also in my book, both of my books actually, were drawn from his data. Strauss, before he passed away, when I showed him the plots that I had made and sent him a copy of my book, he was thrilled to see that his data had been interpreted in that manner. So having said that, what does the Strauss data tell us? And I'll say very quickly, Strauss was brilliant because he used his instrument twice, and he has many years of standardizing his instrument. It wasn't the first time out of the barn. And what it does essentially asks the same set of questions twice. It asks a person once in their role as a victim, and it asks them a second time in their role as a perpetrator. And that's why you get this interesting set of data that shows how many people, male and female, are admitting that they've been violent, and at the same time also measures their experience of violence directed towards them. Anyways, you saw the plot of those data in the video, so I won't belabor that other than to say, any empiricist, including myself, should always want to reevaluate what they think may be true based upon new evidence. So please send me new. And one of the things I'll do right off the bat is evaluate it really quickly to see if what you've sent me is empirically trustworthy. And if it is, then I'll tell you how we can incorporate it into presently known thinking about DV. That's the best I can do on that right now.
Okay.
What else you got?
Thank you, Eric. Okay, so Terrence White's got some more questions. All right, so your presentation referred to a startling rate of false accusations being made primarily, but not exclusively by women. Is it actually domestic abuse to make false allegations about a partner or a former partner?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm really glad you brought that up. And I was consulting on a case just this week where that's the argument that they're going to try to make. I think if we look at the definitions of abuse, which would typically be to try to, if it's not physical abuse, battering, and it's non-battering abuse, then that would include intentional infliction of emotional pain on somebody, which is similar to the Nad Carney decision in California. So if a person says, well, by God, I'm not going to let you have the kids, and if I got to file this DVRO to keep you from getting the kids, the question is, was intentional infliction of emotional abuse calculated in that decision? Well, it gets a little complicated there, but I think the bottom line is this. We could probably boil it down and say that anybody who misuses any process has caused the other person to experience abuse. And if you're in one of the qualified relationships, married, formerly married, engaged, formally engaged, dating, formally engaged, made a baby together, if you're one of those protected categories, then that abuse would be called domestic abuse. So I think you're on the right track. The way to get that recognized by the courts is going to be through litigation. Good luck getting it through most legislatures. It's the way to go, I think.
All right.
What do we got?
Yep, and he has another question. Social legal research has emerged in the UK as an official field of study in university law departments. We have seen high-profile graduates publicly saying things like objectivity is undesirable. Have you seen anything like that in California? And how much of the recognition of unfounded tropes in court be the result of deliberate mistraining of attorneys and judges?
And so, first of all, I'm trying to find that question because it helps me a lot to read stuff and I don't see it. Is that a question off of Zoom?
Yes, it's a Zoom question.
Okay. For some reason, it's not showing. Would you mind posting it or pasting it into Zoom so that I can see it? It helps me when I can read this stuff while I'm responding to it. It sounds very interesting. I just would like to see it in writing if I could. Thank you. Socio-legal research emerged in the UK as an official field of study. Interesting. I always step back and say, University of Law School, doing a study. Wait a second, what qualifications do attorneys have to conduct any type of research? It's one of the points I hammer home in Judicial War on Men. So getting past that, assuming that maybe they have a PhD and they have empirical training, because the vast majority of PhDs do not have empirical training, but assuming that here in this law school, somebody is properly qualified, high profile graduates publicly saying objectivity is undesirable. That's interesting. So yes, have I seen anything like that in California? Well, I'm not going to break it down just to California because when I read the research literature, I read it from worldwide. Do I have academic affiliations in California? Yes, I do. But I'm not going to drill down to the level of talking about them because I really do try to, as much as possible, not include my academic affiliations here, because when you present here, you have a target on your back. A lot of people want to get you and they play dirty and they try to get you to lose your job. But I am going to say, I've created a tool. It's in my book, Judicial War on Men, and it's a numerical tool that you use to evaluate the empirical quality of any article. I would be very interested to see an article coming out of a university law department that describes objectivity as undesirable. I'd be very interested in getting a copy of that article, and I will use my evaluation tool and I'll tell you what the empirical reliability score is. My guess is it's probably not even going to be an empirical, it's not even going to be a study. This is going to be somebody's opinion. And I do want to say we have to be so careful. Just because you got a PhD or just because you have a master's degree in no manner whatsoever conveys that you have any knowledge at all about how to engage in empirical science. The vast majority of people, even running around with a PhD, such as myself, lots of people have PhDs, the vast majority have little to no training, knowledge training, skills, or experience in empiricism. Why is that important? I was at an academic conference in person, sat a couple seats away from a lady who said, but I have a PhD and therefore I know how to evaluate research. Didn't say anything. I was just a member of the audience, but I remember just cringing, like there is no automatic granting of the capacity to read the literature well and to evaluate if it's a well-done study that allows you to trust the findings simply because you have a PhD. You have to have empirical training. How do you get it? You have to go to a research university. If you're going to another university and it's not a research university, you're probably not going to get it. Then you have to be with an empirical professor who mentors you for years. That's how you learn it, one-on-one from your mentoring professor. They make you read a lot of books. They make you design a lot of studies. They go through and tell you how messed up everything you designed is, and they tell you why, and you learn. And you learn in these one-on-one conversations over years. That's how you learn to be an empirical scientist. So having said that, can you hear all the little red flags I'm having about it? So please do send it to me. I'd like to correspond on that, and I'll tell you what I find. What do you got? What else you got?
Okay. All right. Dean Hedges has a question. Have you ever examined the RAIN publications for false or faulty conclusions? RAIN being RAINN. I think is a rape.
I've heard of it.
Yeah.
I'm not super familiar with it, so feel free to write me and talk about it. But I probably would claim ignorance about RAIN right now.
Right. It's something
Sounds
I
interesting.
heard before. It's the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network.
Yeah, now that you spell it out, I have heard of it, but I don't know much more than that. I did spend time researching the national level coordination between all the feminist women's groups in the United States. I spent a considerable amount of time looking at them in California, but I looked at the national level as well. That's the extent of my knowledge about it. I did cover it in my book in one of the chapters, I think chapter 3, because the amount of funding is just unbelievable. Millions of dollars to, I think there was well over 100 of these places just in California. If you want to correspond about that, we certainly could. What do you got?
All right. So we still got a couple more minutes here, so feel free to get some more questions going on. But in the meantime, I'm gonna ask some questions I have my own until some more roll in. So here's my question: how do we adequately address those who zealously state that false accusations simply don't happen enough to be considered a high priority issue? How do we talk to these type of people?
I have a lot of thoughts about that. The first one is, I'm not sure that I've certainly done a good job, I think, of explaining feminist judicial process. I'm not sure that I can say that I'm particularly qualified about how to be persuasive in a one-on-one basis. I will say that I do believe that people who have organized successful social movements, whose books I do read, and so I know what they say, would be that sometimes this is done on a one-on-one basis and people fall into three categories. They're not going to listen, they already agree with you, or they're in that middle ground. So I would suspect the first thing you have to do is figure out, are you talking to somebody who's not going to listen? Because if so, you've only got so much time on earth. Why do you want to spend time talking to them? So possibly the first thing is to find somebody who at least is going to listen. I had a friend who is a hardcore feminist. I like having hardcore feminists as friends, who reviewed one of my books for me, gave me a lot of good criticism, and it changed and made my book better, in my opinion. So part of it may also be going and listening. Why? Well, sometimes if you develop enough of a relationship, you can even ask questions like, why, what lays behind this thinking? What drives you to it? Why? Because you're always thinking about, what's my strategy to change people's minds, to change people's practice? And even if there's someone who can't be changed, befriending them might help you learn strategically important information. At the end of the day, I do think that the majority of people are kind of followers and not leaders. And they're not going to follow something that's not popular. So I do suspect this is for men's rights, this is for boys' rights, this is for overcoming a lot of other forms of discrimination based on a characteristic. You have to make it popular. How do you do that? Well, I'll tell you an interesting story. Without talking too much about what I do, I am in academia, and it also involves being very involved with politics. And so one time when I was walking up to the state legislature, going with a very high-ranking academic person who was about to appear before a committee, somebody I had approached and said, I will do anything you want. Just let me always come with you and ask questions. I want to understand how the legislative process works. And she told me, I'm bringing you along in case I need someone to share a quick statistic. But watch, nobody's going to want to hear what you have to say. But they're all going to be interested in what I have to say. When we walk back afterwards, we'll talk about it. And that's exactly what happened. You know what she did? And this is a high-ranking, educated person, very well respected. And she went in and she told a story. And that's what connected with the legislators. Some already knew they were going to vote, can't connect with them. The lobbyists are already bought them off or whatever. But some were vacillating. And she connected to a story, not to my statistics. So there's something to be said for figure out who might be willing to listen to your position, befriending the hardcore people to find the weaknesses in their arguments. Why? Because you can find the antidote to their weaknesses and use it when you're trying to persuade. And also, don't underestimate the value of stories. Tell them a story about a little boy that got broken. Or tell them a story about what happened to you. And then maybe you can give them a little statistic or two and tell them which way you think they should go. Off the top of my head, that's the best I can do.
All right, well, thanks for that answer. All right, so I got another one for you. Let's see. Can you talk more on whether there'll still be a more pro-female bias in a situation or dyad, as you referred to it in your video, where both male and female partners are exercising non-defensive battery? Do you think there's still going to be, more support towards the woman in that case when anyone's looking at it?
What I think isn't really important, but what data shows us is important. And I make that distinction only because I'm going to say, I've looked at some cases. In fact, I'm consulting on a homicide case right now, as a matter of fact. And you have a circumstance sometimes where a man in a relationship with a woman can be the victim of domestic violence and not have perpetrated any of it. And then the police get called and he gets falsely accused. and he's the one who gets arrested. And then it goes to the court system where there are prosecutors who are hardwired and programmed to automatically say, well, if he denies being an abuser, he must be an abuser. So now he's going to go through that process. Once he's been charged, then it's going to be, well, we're going to offer you a plea deal. So he's got a choice. Do I spend a year in jail and don't see my kids? Or do I plea and agree to go to a 52-week DV reprogramming camp and see supervised kids, but as soon as I get done with that, I get unsupervised, and so they make a decision to plead guilty because they want to see their kids and they can't afford to lose their job for a year. And then they go before a judge who is also programmed. They won't say it, but they're programmed to, well, you better issue that DVRO because if not, you're going to get overturned. And no judge wants to be overturned. You see, there is a system where feminist judicial practice at all levels, starting with the police, going to prosecution, going to the civilian side, family court, also the way judges are trained. I'm not sure I'm exactly answering your question, but I am saying the deck is stacked and a man doesn't get to come in. Typically, stereotypically, if you will, a man doesn't get to come in and get an even playing field, equal access to justice at the police level, equal access at the prosecution level, equal access at the criminal punishment level, equal access at the family law. It is stacked against them. And that's one of the reasons you see so many men who are so frustrated. And then what's really kind of sad, and I've watched this because I've coded a couple of hundred cases already. I go sit there and I code these cases as part of the study that I'm doing. And you'll see a man that's not very sophisticated, doesn't speak well, and he'll come in and for months now he's been treated as guilty when in fact he might be innocent. We do know many of them are innocent. When they say they're innocent, they really are. But he'll come on and he'll finally lose it in court. And now the judge is probably going to think, well, this guy must be guilty. Clearly he has temper issues. Clearly he can't control himself in court and doesn't consider the alternative possibility that maybe his heart is broken. His reputation's been destroyed. He's lost his children. The court is treating an innocent man as guilty, and he finally had enough, and he broke down in court. Judges aren't getting trained on that.
Yeah, that's a very good answer.
The system is stacked.
Yeah.
What do you got? What's next?
Okay. Well, let's see. Another question I had was, so you mentioned that false allegations are the major alibi. The major reasons that they happen, the motives, are alibis for pregnancy and STDs, revenge, and you mentioned even it happens during child custody cases. So can you think of any more reasons, however small a percentage they may be?
Yeah, I can't think of any more. I'm going to just strictly go with the ones that I got out of my study. I did the nationwide study of child custody evaluators, first and only study of its type. And the other one come out of those really well done studies at several universities and police departments. And so the reasons I gave specific to rape, as described, being angry, covering for a possible pregnancy, covering for an STD, those aren't ones I made up. Those came straight out of cases where females acknowledged they made a false accusation and answered the question why. The one that scares me the most, and it's the only stat I had memorized, was the 44% that did it for revenge. It should be zero. Nobody should ever make a false accusation, period. But the fact that 44% of the women acknowledged, one, they made a false accusation of rape, and two, they did it as revenge. And some of them went on to explain it would be things such as, well, I thought this was beginning of a relationship between us. I thought we were celebrating our new relationship by going all the way. And then when I found out he just saw it as a one-night stand, all right, here we go. Here's my revenge. I'll show you. That's kind of scary because the physical act didn't change. What changed was the mindset of the false accuser. Didn't get what I want. Want to talk exchange theory? I'm going into this physical exchange on the expectation that it's going to get me something. Okay, like it or not, that's kind of almost an exchange theory type of an approach. I didn't get what I want, so now I change how I report it afterwards. Mothers watching this video, you should be very frightened that your sons in college will face that. 50% of rape accusations are false. And of those, almost half can be proven false, and the other half are admitted false. What do you got? What's next? I think you have to hit your space bar.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm doing that like so much this time around. I don't usually have this problem. All right, so actually, what I want to do is that since we're past the halfway point, you had some polls happening for this one that you actually kind of set up yourself. So why don't we kind of take a look at those polls right now?
You bet. I'm going to pull out my iPhone here because I'm
right.
logged in on both. I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yep.
And let's go do the polls. And by the way, we had Huva keeps sending me these little messages, interrupt me. Okay, so there's the polls. So we'll go to 20 responses to this one. What is the major legal vulnerability of most DV experts? And of course, everybody answered it before they watched the video, so probably all know the answer now. Now I'm going to say this, all of the answers at least were partially true, but there was one that I believe is the best answer. And let's read very carefully how the question is worded, and I'll go over it. What is the major legal vulnerability, right? So that means which one is an attorney going to exploit during a deposition, during courtroom testimony, in support of a motion to have a DV expert disqualified. In other words, disqualified means the judge says you can't testify here because you're not an expert. You don't really know what's going on about DV. Okay, so here was the answer choices. 9 out of 20 said they present dogma as fact. It is true, but that's not their number one vulnerability. 10 out of 20 said they report empirically falsified claims as fact. That's also true, but it's not their major vulnerability. 3 out of 20 said they lack law enforcement or similar investigative experience. I agree, but again, not the major one. 3 out of 20 said they lack sufficient knowledge, skills, and experience in testifying. That's also true. Some of them get on the stand, and but for a sympathetic judge and a very kind prosecutor or petitioner's attorney, you know, they would get destroyed on the stand, and then the defense attorney doesn't have the courage to do it. But that's not the one we're looking for. We're getting there, but we're not there yet. 4 out of 20 said they're relatively ignorant of pertinent civil and criminal law. That's also true, but not the one. Remember, what's going to be exploited by the attorney? The next one, they lack sufficient public-facing exposure. 4 picked that. Only 2 people picked the correct answer, and the correct answer is they lack empirical training. Now, again, after you watch the video, you're going to know that's true. Why? Because if they lack empirical training, then they can't tell you what the research literature says about DV. They're not going to be able to distinguish between well-done studies and badly done studies. So consequently, they're not even going to be able to tell you the studies they rely upon in making those 13 claims, let alone be able to tell you which well-done empirical studies support them, let alone even be able to talk about what well-done empiricism says. So that's their vulnerability from which everything else flows. They lack empirical training. Okay, next one. And I'm sorry for the typos, very sorry for the typos. Per a nationwide study, what percentage of unsubstantiated accusations of DV made by females in high conflict divorce and child custody cases are false? Okay, so that comes out of my nationwide study. I'm the only one who ever did it. And I wish I'd worded it a little bit different, but I'm going to just tell you what the correct answer is. About 17% of the time in child custody or other domestic violence, family law related processes where there is no proof of DV other than the accusation. And typically it's never come up until child custody is being argued about. 17% of the time, so a little bit less than 1 in 5 cases, females make the accusation of DV. First time we've heard of it. The child custody evaluators, and I polled them in every state in the United States. Half were females, half were males. I controlled for level of education, level of experience. It's a match study for those who understand what I'm saying. The experts, the court evaluators, the ones that the judges turn to advise them on a case, 41 to 55% of the time. So roughly half of those accusations are false. Okay, last one. Let's go to this one. When testifying in court, domestic violence experts typically make the same 13 claims about DV. How many have been falsified by well-done empirical studies? And the answers were all of them, all but one, or none of them. Depending upon how you want to play with the word empiricism, it's either all have been falsified or a couple of them you could say they haven't been falsified, but they haven't been proven, and the absence of proof is interpreted to be the most stringent application of falsification. As you learned from the video, the biggest takeaway is this: none of them have been proven true, and most of them have been falsified, proven not to be true. Okay, what do you got? What's next? I think you got to hit your space bar again, brother.
Why do I do that?
It's because you've been doing a great job all week and you're tired, and we appreciate the great job you've been doing. Every Q&A I log into, it seems like you're there. So thank you, thank you.
Well, yeah, I try to do my best for that one. So, but actually, I think we are coming to a close to this one because we're basically out of questions. So, do you have any like final statements you'd like to make? And are there some kind of ways for people to kind of get in touch with you?
I'm going to just say this. We need courageous attorneys who are willing to do the litigation that will be resented by judges and vigorously resisted by feminist groups. It's litigation that's necessary to start to cleanse the courts of unqualified DV experts. And when that's done, and when these cases begin to prevail at the superior and appellate court levels, when there are appellate decisions that start to come through, recognizing that a major set of flaws have been taught by DV experts and they're not going to be tolerated anymore, then we're going to start to change the conversation on judicial training. You probably are not surprised to find out I've contacted Judicial Council of California. I've offered them a copy of my book for their library. They declined it. I offered to send a copy to the Chief Justice, who is, in addition to running the California Supreme Court, also the chairperson of California Judicial Council. They declined it. I've offered to teach classes that present the empirical knowledge about domestic violence. They've declined that as well. I'm the only person on the planet who has successfully obtained hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of judicial training items used to train family law judges in California about domestic violence. Hence, that's where a lot of the support for my book, The Judicial War on Men, came from. And from having read all these PowerPoints, read these handouts, reading the scenarios, and reading who's doing the teaching, and researching them, and actually knowing who a lot of these people are already. The biggest reform that's going to need to come, that may follow on to the superior court decisions, the appellate court decisions, is going to be to get the Judicial Council of California and every other state and similar professional training bodies in other states and countries, to get them to start cleansing themselves of the feminist dogma about domestic violence, because it's all either falsified or false because it hasn't been proven true. And it can't be proven true. They need to start cleansing themselves of the assumptions that men are violent and women are victims. They need to start accepting the fact that the best done worldwide empirical data shows women are as violent, as non-self-defensively violent as men. They need to start dealing with the fact that even though you prefer to have one batterer and one victim in every case, you've been teaching police officers to ignore men so that they can turn in a case with one accused and one victim, when in fact, in 2/3 of the cases, you should have 2 accused who happen to also be 2 victims, or you could have 2 accused and the kids are the victims. I mean, the amount of reworking in the judiciary that's necessary is staggering. It took 30 or 40 years to take a judiciary that was primarily oriented towards due process. You know, the scales of justice are blind, supposedly. And to revise that judiciary to now we have judges who are deeply steeped in the feminist dogma regarding domestic violence. And it's controlling and coloring their decisions about custody. And it's biasing them against men. The Judicial Council's own data, internal studies they did. I present this in my book. It's in, I think, chapter 3 of Judicial War on Men. Judicial Council's own internal data shows that when they did matched studies where the person requesting a DVRO for the same set of facts was a male, in one study, he was only 50% as likely to get the DVRO issued as if a woman presented the same facts. And in the second study, same set of facts, when a man asked for a DVRO, and then on the same facts a woman did, the woman was 620% more likely to get it. That shouldn't happen on the same set of facts. That's a measure of judicial bias. And these were studies that were done by trainers on judges. I'm the only person who has a copy of them, but I'm telling you about it, and they're in my book. You can actually see the data in my book. So we've got a lot of work to be done. You're not going to do it through the legislature. The legislature are the ones who've created many of these bad laws. The legislature are the ones who've helped, depending upon the state and the country, or the governor's office, or wherever you live, special interest group have helped to put all these judges into place. They weren't hired necessarily or put into place necessarily because of their devotion to due process, to a blindness in the law. They were put in by special interest groups because of their bias, their pro-feminist bias, their anti-male bias, whether it's implicit bias, covert bias, or explicit bias. We see it in court over and over and over. If I had $1 million, somebody came to me and said, what could you do with $1 million? I would use that money to hire law students in multiple courts to use my coding system. And we would code down to the level of the individual judge. And we would be able to finally, once and for all, test the hypotheses that so many men say, which is I never had a chance. That judge didn't listen to me. Now, for all of my conclusions as an empiricist, I'm very willing to do a study like that and have my own opinions falsified. That's okay. That's what an empirical scientist does. But I myself have coded a couple of hundred hearings while I was perfecting this method, and I saw it myself over and over, over and over. Women come in, they've either got a free attorney paid for by VAWA dollars, or they've got a coach who comes and sits next to them and squeezes their hand. But see, one thing I do in my studies is I go out in the hallway and I listen to them talk beforehand. I've heard those conversations and I've coded them. These poor guys don't have a chance. And many of them who have said guilty have done it not because they were guilty, but because that was the quickest way for them to get back to seeing their kids. So it won't go on any further, but I will say these studies could be done. Imagine if I had data, individual level data on judges, and we could do comparisons on matched cases. Once and for all, we could answer that question. Let's game it out. Let's say that, in fact, we did find a significant pro-female, anti-male bias. Once we've got solid data, now you can be going to the federal courts, at least in the United States, and you can be seeking an injunction against the entire California judiciary or against a particular superior court, because now you've demonstrated bias. And you can get the federal court to order them to clean up their act, you know, to go back and learn what they learned in the first year of law school. Justice is blind and due process, and don't abuse your discretion.
Well, thank you for that, Eric. And where can people reach you?
Yeah. PhD, Paul Henry David, PhD, at fastmail.com, fastmail.com. You know I'm going to get a lot of hate mail, but that's okay.
All right.
I'll send them back some love.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining me here today.
And by the way,
Eric.
just to clarify, not hate mail from people at this conference. This is going to go on YouTube. So I just want to say, anybody that thinks they might want to do that, if you want to engage me in a good conversation about this, I love talking to people that think differently than me. But I will say, why don't you do your background first? Buy my book. Sure, I'd like to sell a book, but that's the only book that's available for you to really find out the thinking that lays behind this. Buy my book and then contact me. We'll talk.
All right. Thank you, Eric. And I hope you guys have a great day.
Thank you.